Hello and welcome to the first episode of Radio Free Zion. We've got Austen and Conor today. This episode is brought to you by the Bitcoin Files on TikTok. That's tiktok.com/THEBITCOINFILES. They do a bunch of financial analysis on all sorts of things, not just related to crypto, but especially crypto. So go check out the Bitcoin Files on TikTok. This episode is also brought to you by Zencastr. Zencastr is the way that we record this podcast, despite the fact that we are in remote locations. So Zencastr.com allows you to record video and audio separately on separate computers, and then it splices them together, makes it easy to have both files so you can have much higher quality than you would recording a Zoom call. So check out Zencastr.com, Zencastr.com. And last but not least, and I am genuinely unsure if this is a joke or not, but regardless, goatrental.com, GOAT as in Kanye West, rental.com. Apparently it's a site that allows you to rent goats to keep your grass down. Again, 50-50 on whether this is real or not. There's just enough there that I can't definitely say it's a parody. One way or another, this episode of Radio Free Zion is brought to you by goatrental.com.
My Flavor Flav? We'll at least have the footage in of me putting this on.
Yeah, you should definitely wear the Flavor Flav. I don't know why you wouldn't.
Yeah. Well, because I was just reading the Deadly Ring, and they were talking about, like something like to secure your house, like don't fill it with gold and jade or something. But this is amazing not to. Anyways.
Is that an astrolabe?
Yeah, it's an actual functional astrolabe, a brass astrolabe. I just this would be an amazing chain, so I'm gonna just throw this on.
Got it. So the chain came separate. It wasn't an astralabe Flavor Flav necklace.
Oh no, I didn't have like a jeweler. No, I just got this astrolabe off of the internet, and I can navigate with it. It's all in Arabic. It's great.
Do you know how to navigate with an astrolabe? Could you actually functionally use it? I'm gonna be honest. I don't even know what it does. I just know that it's a symbol for Rome research.
I mean, my Arabic is definitely not good enough to read these inscriptions. Well, the short answer is just no. I've been meaning to for a while, but basically you have to recognize the stars, like the various constellations that are immediately above you, and then I believe it's basically like an ancient GPS system, and so you figure out where the sun is rising, what the sort of various constellations are. You map this stuff up, and then you can do all sorts of crazy things like figure out where Mecca is, or what time you should pray, or that kind of stuff, or how to sort of navigate the globe. Oh man, Magellan's a lot cooler than Justin Bieber.
No, I don't know. I thought that was just a Conorism.
No, that's an Alex Jonesism. That's there's an amazing rant that someone sent me once, and they were saying this could be an advertisement for Rome, and it was Alex Jones completely losing his mind talking about how Magellan is a lot cooler than Justin Bieber, and just how physics, science, discovery, the world is teeming with opportunity.
Yeah, but I didn't. I've
probably shown it to you at our house. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how does it make you feel that I hear Alex Jones and I ask, is that yours, Conor? Does that come from you?
I think Alex Jones. Listen, I've said this before. There was some great back and forth, between Jeff Bezos and Peter Thiel talking about, where Bezos was talking about how contrarian Peter Thiel is, and how contrarians are usually wrong, and Peter was like, when I'm right, I'm really right. And I definitely feel like that's the case for me. I also feel like that's 100% the case for Alex Jones.
He's really wrong sometimes. And then sometimes to give him credit, the Jeffrey Epstein stuff he called 10 years ago and was ranting about, and everybody's like, dude, you're crazy.
Of course.
And of course, that comes with him ranting about Sandy Hook and people saying, "Yeah, you're crazy," and being totally right.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, but that's the thing is like, I mean, PG has that essay on like the risk of discovery and how Newton spent about equal proportions on his three major projects, which were like a heretical kind of Mormon-esque. He was a
Mormon-esque.
Yeah, I mean, it was right. Like the claim that Jesus was, I think so. Arianism, like Jesus was not the same entity as God or the Creator God. That there was like some sort of difference between those two. It was like a major heresy that he was like parsing the Bible for and spending a ton of time on that. And then alchemy and like alchemy and physics and
and Newtonian physics.
They all looked equally weird at the time. So that is just the cost. I think it does reflect the broader problem we have about which maybe we can dive into a bit later, is like when the world's so complicated that the last man who knew everything lived in the 1700s, right? And like we do have to defer to other people in order to like we just don't have the time and attention to be able to understand everything deeply. So you have to figure out who you trust. The unfortunate side effect is that people expect that if someone does one thing wrong, it should invalidate all of their credibility, right? We can't independently separate out, which makes it much harder to,
and vice versa, right? Like one of the things that's most interesting about Twitter to me is you'll see people that are absolute geniuses in one facet of their life say the stupidest stuff in another facet, and I'm sure myself included, right?
Yeah.
But like, I know
that's the cost of thinking out loud, right? Like I heard someone say recently, like, the reason speech is free is because if it costs anything, it'd be way too expensive for us to have any good ideas. Like we have to say so much garbage in order to actually figure out and convene on truth that like, free speech is, and I thought, I don't know, I like the idea of free as that's beer.
Yeah, I read a study once that was like the amount of smut that was published after Gutenberg created the printing press, was orders and orders of magnitude higher than it ever had been, because previously it's pretty much monks writing stuff, and printing a book costs
There weren't a ton of monk pornography. Yeah, the monk pornography intersection was smaller than the printing press pornography intersection. Yeah.
But net, I mean, I don't think any of us would rationally say we would, go back to a world without the printing press. And I think, we're seeing a microcosm of that now with the internet. Like the amount of crazy that's on Twitter is probably orders of magnitude more than the amount of crazy that was written in books 25 years ago. But the amount of genius that you have kind of at arm's length is also higher as a result. So you have to take those trade-offs.
Well, I don't
lever it up.
That. I think the whole idea of technology is that the point of technology is to figure out ways around trade-offs. Actually, like situations where the status quo says that there is a hardcore trade-off between A and B, and if you want to solve that, you do have to kind of go meta on it and figure out, can we get some of the benefits of A without the consequences of B? And it is like new science and new breakthroughs do allow you to get benefits without trade-offs. Just look at birth control.
Sure. Well,
there's new trade-offs introduced every time. There's new trade-offs always introduced, right? But like you can overcome the original trade-off that the technology is designed to solve for. So
in some instances, I think like humans are still humans, right? And so if a communication product, if the goal of a communication product is to get what humans are thinking and feeling and doing out into the public, like, I don't know that you can control that. I mean, thinking about Facebook and Reddit and Twitter trying to battle misinformation, like you can take, very hardline stances on some specific things. But I like,
all right. Anyway, we've already now gotten to the place. Hold on. We've gotten to the place right here where, I spent a few minutes collecting some things from my backlinks in Rome before the call, but like there are a couple quotes that I had pulled up that might be relevant here, and I think one just did, right? So this one's from Michael Nielsen, who has done a bunch of stuff with Andy Matuszek. He was a physicist. Doesn't you probably know him through YC, but he has this book that I love called Reinventing Discovery, and talking about this idea of network science. And here's one quote that I liked, which is, the challenge in scaling up collaboration is that each participant has only a limited amount of attention to devote to the collaboration. That limits the volume of contributions to the collaboration that any one participant can pay attention to. To scale up collaboration while respecting the limitation, online tools must establish an architecture of attention that directs participants' attention where it is best suited. That is where they will have maximal comparative advantage. I could go on, and I probably will in a bit, but like, that's what, Twitter's tried to do this with algorithms. Facebook's tried to do this with algorithms, because if you follow 1,000 people, you now have 1,000 tweets here, and it's all entirely opaque to us as end users. But like, they're trying to give you the content that is the best, and they're shadow banning people who they think are, like polluting the commons. It's somewhat, an authoritarian approach. Like, algorithms are not human systems. They don't handle nebulosity super well. And we can talk about that more too. Like, it's hard to program into ones and zeros human values. And I'd prefer to be able to have a more sort of fine-grained way of controlling my feeds and, how I pay attention to things on the internet. But like TikTok's innovation, was a particular way of trying to get a more optimal feed to maximize its addictive potential, or, entertainment value or time on site or whatever. But like these systems already, we've been having the problem of information overwhelm since at least, Vannevar Bush wrote As We May Think, which sort of sparked the whole, decades and decades later, it became the personal computing revolution and all this stuff. But like, even if we were just dealing with books, there are way more books published than every day there's more words published in books in the traditional format than you can read in your lifetime. So sure. Even if it wasn't Twitter adding some noise in, there's always going to be noise, but I do think that we can find better ways to filter our attention. And that's kind of also what runs with that. But you said you wanted to chat about that stuff. So
no, yeah, you referred to the follow mechanism as if it was, a truism that had already existed. That was really, a broad strokes swat at like, how can we limit information to the people that and
the feed was its own approach too, right? The feed and the follow are both innovations. Whatever algorithms they're applying to give you the default feed is the innovation. TikTok's way of like introducing people with no followers to the general For You page and sort of like A/B testing the success of every video to decide, okay, if it does well with 100 random people, we'll show it to 1,000 random people, then we'll show it to 100,000. Like, all of those things are innovations around attention
Reddit
allocation.
/Hacker News, upvoting, downvoting. You've got, even the concept of a friend, right, was really like, we don't think of it that way now because it wasn't like there was a friend feed to it that it already existed. That's how it came into existence. But if you talk to folks at early Facebook, the concept of a feed versus a wall, which now I think it's built into so many different products, it was highly controversial. A whole lot of Facebook, and to Zuck's credit, there are, I know a bunch of early people at Facebook. There are a bunch of stuff that he tried to do and was adamant about and pounded the table that ended up being totally wrong. But this one, the notion of a feed was one of, like, from what I've heard at least, so maybe that's second or third hand, but came directly from Zuckerberg himself and him saying, I want to feed, and people saying that doesn't make sense, and him saying, well, make it make sense because I'm the CEO. And now it's like,
I mean, you
can't imagine the internet without the concept of feeds,
For sure. I mean, there are two branches we could go down there, or we could keep moving. But like, one is that the mandate may have come from Zuck. The idea clearly was it, had a precedent with Friendster, which had been out for, like a decade or so earlier, right? And so there's a whole notion of like copycats and, like how like innovation, you could even say innovation is overrated, and that, it's about effective copying and remixing that makes things matter. So that's one, we could go down that path. But the other is, it's I got interested in the internet because of this idea of commons-based peer production and like the sort of potential like radical things that can happen with an open source system, like places where people are contributing to the collective good just so that they can look cool or like, be like more popular than someone else in their
so
environment.
The Wikipedia, like, GitHubs of the world kind of thing.
Wikipedia awards are all about, I mean, even you can say academia is like this. People might be emotionally driven by some petty rivalry with like the guy who they think is subtly wrong about the important area that they're studying. But, it ends up being published. Now, it's more obvious in open source how that contributes to the commons because there's like billions and billions of dollars of like code infrastructure that you and I both use that is financially subsidized by the fact that people do it so that they can have a better resume for their job. They do it because they want to, but they're also getting paid by, corporations to do this stuff. But it is one of these places where someone has, they might have a zero-sum competition. Like some might not, but but they might just be like interested in being the best and, showing off and having a, not a material scarcity, but like a social or a relative one, and having the byproduct be this massive expansion of the commons. The flip side of this, so that's it's one of the amazing things about open source. The flip side of it is, could you imagine if Facebook was a protocol, when Zuck turned off, what was it? Like turned off all the crazy social games, like, and pissed off Zynga, and like Zynga at the time was like 10% of, like it was already 10%.
Like both traffic and revenue. Yeah. In fact, I think it was like a dramatic, like if you look back at the Facebook IPO, and one of the Zynga founders is an investor in Lambda. So I've talked about this a little bit. Like Facebook's revenue was dramatically games driven for a long time.
Yep. And like the thing about having a hierarchical leadership structure, right? I mean, there's also something where I think the A16Z guys were right that there's a legitimacy that founders bring, that they can actually like do radical changes because they have, the mandate of heaven from having birthed the thing into reality. Can you imagine, I don't know, the Ethereum community or like the blockchain, like the Bitcoin people, like turning off Zynga because it's a worse user experience, and suddenly you've got all these, stakeholders who were like, was it Marcus Pinker or, like the Zynga founders? Like, of course, those would have been major Facebook coin holders, and they would have had, they would have been screaming and hollering. And like, I can't imagine a decentralized community making those kinds of changes. So for better or for worse, there are advantages to different kinds of structures.
Well, it's even interesting. I mean, within crypto, right? You have Bitcoin, which, who knows who Satoshi is. I'm sure you have a theory, but we don't know who's, at least there's not a broadly acknowledged individual.
There's no consensus
by the name of
on
Satoshi.
there, yeah.
Right. Whereas Ethereum, it's clearly Vitalik. And like,
I think it's Algor.
But even within those two different protocols, right? Their governance is very different. And Vitalik tries to be democratic to the extent that he can, but like when Vitalik speaks, everybody listens. Whereas when Craig Wright speaks, not so much, right? Like, when whoever, I don't know who the equivalent.
I mean, it's interesting because I can't even think of a name that would be even within an order of magnitude in terms of influence on the community, right? So, but I'm not as deeply enmeshed in iHodl like the best of us, but like that's it. But so where do you want to take this? What are your?
So I mean, we had a kind of fork in the road where we talked a little bit about organizational structures and how they affect the commons and all that stuff. I also am interested in talking about you mentioned earlier the fact that not anybody contains all of the information, and that you couldn't possibly contain all of the skill sets, and how that, I mean, about us specifically and you specifically, like that is very real being a founder, right?
Yeah.
Because you are bringing on people who are experts in their domain that you will never understand. And it has taken them a lifetime to understand that. I think that's probably the most difficult aspect of like early stage founding, when you move from being, for lack of a better term, an IC or an individual contributor to a manager, which is something that feels foreign to most founders. Like, you didn't start a company to be a manager. But that's a difficult transition, and people make it so differently. And I'd love to, and I know, obviously from talking to you that you've run through a lot of issues with that, and it's hard. And I want to hear how you think about that.
I mean, it's interesting that you say that, because I almost had the opposite experience of what you just described.
Interesting.
Because the like 2007 era, right? Like, I wasn't that interested in the internet, like around like 2006, 2007. I had been sort of an anarcho-primitivist. I thought, my future was going to be hanging out in like, the rainforest, trying to like identify rare plants that could be used for, I don't know. Yeah. Like
Sure.
drug discovery and things like
some
that.
Pharmaceutical application.
I was interested. But I was interested in ethnobotany, and I was interested in culture and these things, but I was like pretty anti-modernist, and I was, not particularly interested in technology until I got interested in this whole open source thing. And I saw parallels with that, and like community organizing and all sorts. Like I saw this crazy, like I saw, a future that I could believe in, that I was like, that's worth working towards. But my first startup, I was like having to fill in while running the company, what was front end and back end, like how does a website get delivered? like it's a system of tubes, like what is going on here? Like I didn't know anything, right? And so I had to build a team, and like I had no idea how to market, how to price, how to brand, how to like design, how to recruit, how to manage, like or how to build things. And we did okay, for like a couple guys out of UMass, and like for being 19 and not having known about the internet. Like it was,
I mean, for those that don't know,
like,
you're acquired by AOL. Like was a solid acquisition. Wasn't like if a
it
startup
was a soft landing
started by someone who doesn't know what they're doing, doesn't go to zero, that's a win, right? Like that's a huge win.
For sure. It felt like a existential failure for me, because the original idea of, the first company was called Localocracy, and it was basically to build to figure out like what would be, if you were to run a town, if you were to run a government on Wikipedia, and you were to effectively manage the attention of, like it was a political revolution in like hidden inside. So someone joked on that, like, I mean, they were definitely trying to give a dig at me, and they were like saying that Rome is like a cult with a thin veneer of a software startup in front of it. Like my first company was very much trying to be a political revolution with a thin veneer of a software startup in front of it. Like it was I was on the fence about whether to incorporate as a company the whole time. Like I was like, I didn't know whether to. The original idea was like, oh, we'll like figure out how to build this thing, and then I'll like go door to door and run for mayor of some town, and then I'll hand over the town to the people. I was like Bane, like the people, like, but yeah, I've been interested in this like collective intelligence thing for a long time, and the first one totally failed. Like having a small, acquisition, like it, and particularly because post acquisition we weren't able to do the thing that we had hoped to be able to do inside of AOL. It felt like a total failure, and I felt like for the like Rome is in a substantial way a continuation of like the mission of the first one, which is figure out how to help people think together and then take action together faster, and have it be a smart kind of thinking and acting, and figure out how to create this like information commons that like like builds a map of what is known about the world and helps us change it in effective ways. yeah, I took like, I don't know, it was close to 8 years between when I left AOL and when Rome went public. And like a huge amount of that time was spent trying to figure out, like, doing things that didn't scale and trying to backfill all this information, like create I dropped out of university at undergrad, but I was like, what would a master's program look like that was like tuned for the thing I'm trying to do, and had all the structures that are helpful, and of peers and of accountability and that kind of thing. I did all that kind of stuff in those 8 years and had to learn everything, like how to fundraise properly, because I was pretty bad at that the first time. How to recruit, how to market, how to like design. I like had never touched Figma or Sketch or anything like that, and I went really deep on a bunch of technical subjects and tried to figure out how to model this problem. So it's a startup is an interdisciplinary research effort. You have to learn everything when it's just you. Like in general, every role at Rome I did first. And even now, when we've been trying to hire for roles, that there isn't a title that makes sense for this thing. Like the thing that we're trying to hire people to do has not been done before. At least in the normal startup. And so I have to also figure out what the role even looks like, and can I do it? And then can I hire somebody who's better than me at that thing? So yeah, it's tricky. I don't remember but then you obviously want to be able to incorporate experts into these things. And the experts are not going to have the context of 8 years of thinking about the holistic system and like how everything fits together. And they're going to expect a lot more structure than, you have, like, for the first 3 years of Rome, it was just me and Josh, and we lived together and spent every waking minute together. So all of this context was able to transfer via osmosis. Shifting then to, being like 10 people on 6 continents is pretty wild. So, but yeah, I don't know. Where do you want to go with that?
No, I think that's really interesting. 10 people on 6 continents. First of all, wow.
I don't actually know that this is a good idea either, right? I'm like, currently, I mean, part of the reason we moved to Utah was so that we could have a place that could, beckon people, like, Statue of Liberty style, like, come all in. And so now, now we've reconsolidated. And so we're now 4 people, like, in this house, living in the house together, right? So like we've kind of gone back to this like highly and we're starting to do a lot more to just try and like allow some of the high context stuff that isn't just things that are going to happen that don't make a ton of sense to happen asynchronously, or through text, or like that sort of informal vibe transmission. Like, it's like, I've realized, even if it's the middle of somebody's workday, for them to join us from like 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. and we're just hanging out, like, occasionally that definitely makes sense, so that people can feel incorporated into the structure of it. But anyways, there's I've got a lot of opinions, but partially it's, like, mostly from the things that didn't work, but also some theory and some things that are kind of working now.
What didn't work?
I mean, what doesn't work about, there are certain things I think get taken for granted, that seem sort of obviously wrong to me, right? One is like, I'm tempted to like take a second and go and pull these quotes up, but like, with knowledge work, the notion of how you manage your attention, which is a massive task, especially if you're doing complex things, right? Essentially got like completely punted to individuals. Like there would be no sort of sense of like, here's how you should manage your time, and here's how you should manage your to-do list, or like it became sort of taken for granted that like it was the burden of attention allocation and the burden of like knowing where to find things and knowing like having different strategies for how to schedule your life, and those things should all be shifted down to the individual contributor. And it could be, and they should be completely ad hoc systems. I feel like that is something that, I love Peter Drucker's like the effective executive, like, the first person, if you're going to manage anybody, is being able to manage yourself. Like, I think there's great things but I think that's actually a huge burden. And I think that a lot of the reason that, as you grow, the output per person falls dramatically because there's so much time spent in coordination. There's so much time of like people talking to other people to figure out the muddle of it is like horrendous. Like there's no way that, I've talked to other founders that were basically saying like, you should expect this like logarithmic curve in terms of output, or like, you should expect that, like, but that I don't think has to be correct. I actually just think that this is like fundamentally, I think that you could have and this is why I was citing the Nielsen stuff, right? Is that like, if you have a system that is able to effectively allocate people's attention, you should be able to allow like the right person matches to the right problem at the right time and have sort of designed serendipity and spontaneity and a lot more fluidness than like the fact that we manage roadmaps, quote unquote roadmaps, like we're farmers. Like there's some sort of, like the reason it's the mythical man month problem, like the reason you can't, engineers are notoriously bad at predicting how long it takes them to solve stuff is because if you knew how to do it, like you can't price in the unknown unknowns and the known unknowns even. Like you have no idea for many problems. You can't put a deadline on insight. And so it actually is just literally impossible. You can have a sense of like, I feel like we're pretty close to here. I feel like we're like very far from here. I feel like these things are prerequisites to this. But, you're going to be wrong almost all the time because you're just dealing with things that are fully like uncertain. And so, yeah, I feel like there's a lot of conventional wisdom that where it's just normal and good for every subsequent person to like add to the weight of the organization. I feel like, the whole point of hypermedia tools. I mean, this we'll get. I talk about Rome is we're trying to build Excel for thought, and by that I mean we're trying to build a programming language for thinking in and for structuring your own attention and for structuring attention amongst a group of other people to solve really hard problems, and trying to build a programming language for thinking is very different from building a normal programming language, but also very similar. But the like. Well, and that's a whole rabbit hole to go down. But
yes. So
what was like the original question?
No, one of your base hypotheses is that the assumption, so you referred to the mythical man month, which is basically, if you have one engineer, it takes X amount of time, and there's the theory that if you add two engineers, it will now take half the time. That is totally wrong and never ends up being the case. But it sounds like
we don't try to do this with babies,
it actually
right?
Slows down dramatically as you add more engineers to a problem effectively.
Yeah, you can't distribute a baby across 9 wombs.
Sure.
And have it be born in a month, right? So there are some places where, but I also think that you can. Well, I'll pull up this other Nielsen quote that I love, which is modularizing the collaboration. That is figuring out ways to split up the overall task into smaller subtasks that can be attacked independently or nearly independently. Reduces the barrier for new people and broadens the range of available expertise. It's difficult to achieve, requires a conscious, relentless requires a relentless, conscious commitment on the part of the participants.
So to put words in your mouth, your thesis or theory is that given the right infrastructure, given the right thinking language, given the right tooling, you at least at a minimum would not slow down as much as companies generally do. And you could keep, maybe there is still a logarithmic function, but it's either a higher slope or it's less of a logarithmic function, or maybe it's linear. But
I'm hoping to get it like something that is better than linear in terms of output.
You think it's exponential at the end of the day?
I think, I don't know if you can get exponential, but I do think so. All right, I'll throw another few quotes at you that aren't even mine, right? Which is like offline, if someone speaks with you when you're tired and cranky, you may not understand what they said. Online, you can read and reread at your leisure when you're alert and enthused. Offline, it can take months to track down a new collaborator with expertise that complements your own in just the right way. The big advantage of online collaboration over offline collaboration are in scale and cognitive diversity. And by using a carefully designed architecture, this is the last one. And the prerequisites to all this is people being able to build on earlier work, people being able to reuse it. Those are two different things, right? Building on and reusing are different. But like, here's the sort of thesis of, and it's interesting because, plenty of people in our user community I see are like, I've seen folks concerned that the multiplayer focus that we have is like not going to be helpful for them as an individual. And like, I think this is just a misconception, because whether you're reading a bunch of material and ideas don't happen inside a person, right? Ideas happen in a network. That network might be all the stuff you're reading and consuming, but those are also collaborators, and your past and future self are collaborators that you're trying to coordinate with, right? And I can get more in a lot of the features of Rome right now. They were kludged or hacked together to try to help me program my own attention and like be able to deal with more nebulous problems. But here's the thesis, right? By using a carefully designed architecture of attention, online tools enable collaborations to involve far more people than is practical in offline conversation, right? And this is where like Zoom is not remote work, right? At all. Right. Like Zoom is just a worse meeting where you have worse eye contact. This is one of the reasons that almost all of our all hands meetings, we try to stay almost entirely in the room, because it's not about, except for the like high, and this is also why we use a ton of like video recording stuff from our meetings. And we do have a lot of conversations. There's way more rich information in terms of emotional expressiveness, like figuring out where somebody's actually at. We're dealing with humans, right? Humans have emotions and feelings and prior frames and like ways of making meaning out of their individual observations. Those are tricky, like really tricky. That's why we hire so many people from cults, like actual, like good, like there exists good cults,
like full-blown cults,
like full-blown collaboration cults. I would say there's like, I've only encountered two and I've hired people from both of them. But like, that's this idea that with the right architecture of attention, you can have, a wider set of people whose expertise you're drawing from. You're able to give them something where it's a much more engaging problem set, right? Because they're facing problems that they have enough knowledge of that they could actually solve. Ideally, if you've got the infrastructure set up properly, all the inputs that they're going to need are in one place, right? And like they're creating an output that is going to be useful, even if it's not picked up immediately. They don't have to have a 2-hour meeting with every subsequent person who like is going to try to build off their work or take their thing and integrate it in with something else. It's hard to design these kinds of human systems. It requires thinking and writing and doing work in a very, very different way. But the upside is we can talk more about this in your experience with like running Lambda School and like running it both as a school and as a company. The problem I'm generally trying to solve as a manager is, what is the sort of sweet spot where the idea of deliberate practice?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like for anyone listening, deliberate practice is like, if you want to get really good at guitar, you don't spend all the time continuing to play the part of the songs that you like focus on the solo that you can't quite master. Like you like do the thing over and over again that is like right at the edge of your competency, and that's how you're going to level up the fastest, right? And so because I actually I prefer to work with people I actually care about. Like that's the only, I have to see them all the time. I prefer to have people I actually care about, like in my intimate relations, and like, you want to help them develop, and also they're going to do their best work when they are like fully engaged. So the challenge as a engineering manager or as a manager of any kind of talent is, what's what problem is useful for the company right now that's right at the edge of this person's capability, that's going to develop them as a person, it's going to keep them highly engaged, and also it's useful for us. And also, like, you know, it, like, all of the skills that are going to be needed to ship this thing out are here. Like, we actually, like, we can make progress on this, and, you know, and you're trying to coordinate that with a bunch of people, like, with different skills and, you know, different levels of engagement and motivation. So it is like, roadmaps should always be extremely dynamic, because it's going to be based on how quickly is talent developing in your company, right? How good are you at assessing it? Even, like, how good is your hiring process, and how good is your, like, I think this is also why it's a lot easier for managers to manage if they know the domain really well. Like, it's really hard to have a non-technical engineering manager, because you're not going to be able to, you're going to end up just like playing favorites with like who gets interesting projects, or like it's going to become all sorts of nonsense politics, instead of, you know, ideally the relationship is something like a sports coach or a tutor, where it's like, okay, this problem is one that I think you can solve, and it's going to be challenging, and you will learn as you do it, and also it will be great for the company, right? Like, that's a hard routing problem. But you're a router. As a manager, you are a router.
The one thing that you mentioned that I found surprising, and I don't know if it's right or wrong, but that doesn't like align with my mental model, is the expectation that everyone is working on a problem that is at the edge of their capacity, and therefore everybody is doing something that's deliberate practice. I, generally speaking, optimize for, I mean, to the extent possible, like, you know exactly how to do this thing, and you're just going to come hammer it out, and then we'll find something else for you to work on. Like,
I mean, I've also, sometimes you got to do that too, because there's something where it's like it does depend, right? The challenge is, if you give, I've had situations with people I manage where, they came in and they had some expertise. They brought some new expertise to the company that, like, you know, I didn't have, or like the existing team at the time didn't have. And so I was like, here's a bunch of things that should be pretty easy for you, because you know how to do this. And they're super important because we haven't been able to do them for a while, because we haven't had somebody who knew how to do this. And like, and maybe this is a cultural thing of just, you know, like, what people's expectations are, especially if they're very good. As soon as they got bored, their morale fell. They like it became extremely difficult to work with them, and they started phoning it in on problems that, like, they could have knocked out of the park with like a little, if they were actually putting focused energy on it. But they like were way, like, performing way below what my expectations of their abilities were, and, you know, like that's
your suspicion is because they're bored, because they're so good at the thing that they're supposed to do that it's not interesting.
They're phoning it in. They're not paying attention. And, like, you know, this is a craft, right? It's like, if you phone it in, you're phoning it in, and like, you might, at least, you can end up doing worse than you are capable of doing, because you know. And now I think this is also where, like, culture matters a ton, because if people are if people really care about the mission, and they understand how the thing they're doing can relate to the mission, which is extremely hard to transmit in like a 1 hour a week call, when your previous background is that the people are like hearing you on podcast calls in the house, and like, you guys are talking about it all day. Like, when Josh and I first moved to the Bay Area together, we rented a room in a house that had a bunch of kids, and one of the 2-year-old boy, like, identified us as a single entity. He would refer to Connor Josh, because we like entered the room and left together, and like, we were just sort of like, because we were sharing a single bedroom in this house, and like taking turns who slept on the floor, and just working all the time. And so, like, that level of context over years is extremely hard to transmit to someone who's brand new, who like is extremely confused about why we're doing things different than every other startup they've ever heard of, or like their expectation. They've never worked at a real startup before. They've like only worked at a company that's like already got 100 people. And, you know, it's going to be hard to transmit that kind of stuff in an hour a week, right? Especially when you're also trying to fit all this other stuff into that hour, right? So, yeah.
Fascinating. So yeah, super interesting. I think it was a tweet actually from Delian, who's at Founders Fund / Varda space, that I thought was like, it made me think a lot. And it was something along the lines of, basically, once you hit a certain level of number of employees, I can't remember how many it was 50 or 100 or something, like,
yeah,
you are done trying to fix or get better at something, and you should just assume that if something is bad, it will never improve. And I thought that was fascinating, because I never thought of it that way, but as I look through, the companies that I've worked at, the companies I've invested in, like, it was 100% true. And I don't know if that's just
why
because...
this year was crazy for me, because I was just like, I noticed we grew slowly compared to every other startup, and way too fast compared to where, like, because the thing that we're trying to do is both like it builds on and like necessarily is an iterative improvement in a sense on what we have built so far, but like it, we do not have product market fit in this, like, until we have a true collective intelligence in our company where we can add employees and have at least linear growth in output. For me, right? My mental model is like, and so, product market fit involves using Rome as a programming language for thought. Like, and, in order to, like, it involves this meta recursive structure of like, we will know when we have true product market fit, because like we know how to use the tool, and we have finished building all of the capacities that the tool needs in order for us to actually, for one, like, there's no way we will ever be using Slack. Right now we have a Rome Slack integration that is a hacky sort of starting point, but like it is the operating system for how we think together, right? And so for us, like, that is what product market fit looks like. That is the goal. And, we will be able to tell that we are making progress towards the goal in terms of our, tracking our ability to continuously deliver value to the existing users, right? But like, those are two, we are kind of doing two things at the same time, right? One is to keep us grounded in reality, which is like, are we actually getting smarter as a group? And so we like try and ship things for both features we need to think better together and features that we think will just benefit all the users, like you, who need, a mobile app, right? And like, but yeah, like the question is like for us, we will know that we look like a product that everyone would expect has just like product market fit. And now it's just about doing obvious stuff, which is like listening to users all the time. And like, like it's all about like maintaining this sort of like death march, or like, like this, the same pace that we had over the last year. Right. But I think it's actually very different. I think that like, and that introduces a whole other weird set of things of like, you're trying to grow an organization where, you're inventing a bunch of process, like you're inventing like not just the tool itself, but how you use the tool.
You're trying to simultaneously, as you build Rome, reinvent Rome such that your company uses Rome to be a better company, right? Like it's a very,
but it's also not that different.
It's like a recursive problem to some extent, right?
It is a recursive problem, yes, and it's the same structure that Douglas Engelbart had. He's most known for inventing the mouse, and but in our circles, he's known for the Motherball demos, which was collaborative, like intelligence augmentation in 1968 that we still haven't matched with Zoom and all the other shit. Like we're still not doing all the stuff they were doing in the demo. Rome still even isn't doing everything that was done in the demo. Like he talks about human systems and tool systems, right? Like, so here's another example. One claim I accept, an assumption that I hold a high degree of certainty for, is that people do their best creative work when they have a degree of psychological safety, but also high standards, right? Or like, and these two things are not in conflict. Like you hear folks talk about like what it was like to be on a team with Michael Jordan and just the intensity of the practices, but also there's a like he wasn't out there trying to like screw over the individuals that were there, right? He wasn't trying
there's
to
a respect for
there was a respect,
what he was doing, for sure.
Right. And so, figuring out how to build psychological safety, and also figuring out like the technical skill of like giving a good performance review, like but also like the technical skill of having a frame when folks come in that here we are hard on ideas and soft on people. We expect you to be wrong a ton. We want you to be wrong a ton. And we also want you to show your thinking process and search for like meta patterns in your thinking process, and like be very aware of what you are and are not good at, and have it be a very transparent thing, what people are and are not good at, and have it be okay for people not to be great at things. Like that's not even a like people are, there's a great thread that I could pull it up of like all of the anti-lessons of schooling, like of like you can't, copying off of other people is cheating, being wrong will get you punished, like contradicting the teacher is not acceptable, like all of these norms that even if we think we've gotten rid of them, we were still like 6 hours a day or 8 hours a day or whatever, like in
pretty ingrained in
for 18 years, right? Like figuring out how do you set up a culture that doesn't do those things is damn hard. In addition to like trying to build a tool that will allow us to figure out where is information flowing in the company, where is it bottlenecking, who knows what, that kind of stuff. So, and we've made a bunch of mistakes already. It's been wild, the number of mistakes I was able to make this year. So but yeah.
That's fascinating. But, I mean, I think a lot about company culture now in a way that I didn't when I was just a founder. I was like, when Lambda School was a very small company, right? When I was moving from being an IC to starting to manage to some extent, it was just like, I need a person to do X. There's a person who can do X. They come highly regarded, plug them in. And now I need to figure out how hands-on I need to be with each person. Like, am I supposed to be looking over their shoulder and second guessing them, or do they want me to be step away, or how much do they need my affirmation versus my criticism versus and there's that aspect.
And there's also knowing yourself too, right? So for instance, totally. Like if it turns out that you've hired a ton of people who need your affirmation and you like are completely drained by giving people
affirmation. Yeah.
Right. It's like this was, advice I actually got from talking with Naval, right. Which was mind blowing for me, which was like, because I think, one of the challenges I've had is I can see very clearly all my faults. I'm like super like, and Rome, like, so actually first to just touch on a thing you said before of like how we are both building the tool and like trying to design the organization to use this tool and like have this be this meta thing. That's actually completely normal, because I've been doing that exact, like I had 3 versions of a Rome system before I like had any of the code that's in Rome right now. Right. I had like hacked, like made mods to, OmniGraffle first and then like notational velocity. And then I used an Emacs system that I had made and and each one of them got me a deeper understanding of what the tool, like the limitations of the like 8 different pieces of software, and the sort of, the cake I was baking had an ingredient which was software, and the other ingredient was what were my habits around how to use that software. Like where did I put things? What were the conventions I had for how I wrote about? What did I choose to write about? When did I choose to write about it? All of those things were like mutually developed iteratively over time. And it was crazy because like, as I started building that system, I went from being a completely incapable of getting anything done in my day-to-day basis, like ADHD guy that was just like living in a van and going for runs and reading cognitive science papers and shit, but like nothing was happening in my life, to like, as I started getting into a system that had a recursive self-improvement loop, I was actually able to ship and like learn very fast the things I needed to learn in order to like falsify some hypotheses and ship stuff. So, and we've been doing that with me and Josh for how we use Roam together. Like, the major milestone was when I actually got Josh to use Roam. Like, cause there was a good like 6 months or a year or maybe it was a year where like we weren't taking notes together. Like we were not yet using it collaboratively. and we weren't working out any sort of system of like how to use it so that we could find each other's thinking and build off of it. We were able to get by that because we were in the same house, but like, practice like you play, dog food, like that kind of thing. So yeah. I do think it's possible, but I also think like, like to touch on something that you were saying earlier, there's some things you're good at and you don't get to replace yourself. Like behavior change is possible. It's also extremely costly, like extremely like taxing on your attention to modify any aspect of your behavior, right? I'm lucky that I've been able to go from like quitting cigarettes to just being on like nicotine patches constantly, right? Like that was like really hard this year. And also I'm trying to like completely change, how I deliver feedback to people. Like there is a sense in which like you do want to change yourself when there are places where you see there's like systematic problems, right? If you walk down the street and meet an asshole, you might have met an asshole. If you walk down the street and meet 20 assholes, you're probably the asshole. So like, you do want to do it sometimes, but you want to do it rarely and you can't replace yourself. So like finding people that work well with you is it's a lot better to do it that way, right? You can't replace the founders. I mean, some companies you can if they're just a clone or something like that. But
yeah. No, that's super interesting. And I also think like I think about the different. I'm not going to say who gave me this mental model, but because they would not want to be outed like that. But the allegation was that Twitter somehow takes A+ players and produces like a B- product and outcome, whereas Amazon takes like B players. And no offense to anybody at Amazon, love all of you.
I've heard this mental model, and this was C. You're saying B-. You're like, it's amazing the way that you are like, you're already making this less extreme, but like someone out there thinks that there's really talented people at Twitter doing garbage work and like very mediocre people at Amazon doing amazing work.
Yeah. Right? And And the thesis for that was more around like going back to, and if you read Working Backwards, there's actually a fascinating, they go in depth. I can't believe they were able to publish that book. I'm shocked about like how exactly Amazon works and how, I mean, if you look at a lot of the most successful companies, the piece that tied them together was that like our decision making and our work product is not, presentations or discussions. It is code, or it is, and the way that we communicate is in the product. And when Bezos said, okay, everybody at Amazon, we are now, everything is a microservice and everything has an externally facing API. And in that book, the authors talk about how if there is communication, that is evidence that something within the product is broken. Which is completely fascinating to me because that is not the way that most companies operate. And the assumption that the communication that happens in the product is more important than like, hey, let's make sure that we all get on the same page and collaborate. The throughput that enables is orders of magnitude higher than, if you're an MBA management consultant putting together a bunch of pitch decks and saying, here's what you should do. And I noticed that at Lambda School in the early days when we didn't have a strong product culture and it was people trying to tell people to change their behavior or change what they're doing. And the lossiness of that, for lack of a better word, is just fascinating versus like when it's actually a product and you can just change a product and ship a product. I think that's an underrated aspect of why software is so powerful. Like if you're changing a product, well, use the Git flow as an example, right? There are agreed upon, there's an agreed upon production, there is an agreed upon development stage. There are agreed upon methodologies through which you can submit a pull request and suggest changes to a product, and agreed upon methodologies through which that change is accepted into the product. And once it is accepted, it is part of the product now. And so you don't have to talk about, what is changing. You just make the change. And once it's changed for everybody instantly everywhere. And it's just such a powerful paradigm that I think is drastically underrated. If you talk to logistics people about like why couldn't Amazon exist pre-software, is because the coordination costs of making all the stuff that they make happen 0% chance you could do it without software. I think that's completely fascinating.
All right. Well, there is something significant when the product is the communication internally about the product is the product itself, right? I think is what you were saying.
Yep.
And that like, it's a recursive self-improvement. Oh man, like next time we talk, I got to talk about Odin and why he's my favorite Norse god. Like he is the god of recursive self-improvement, and like his mythology is amazing. If you view it as a paradigm around like sharpening the saw, improving your ability to improve all this other stuff, like Odin's the guy. All right, couple things I'm going to knock out quick. So one, like it was fascinating to learn that Obama's way of making decisions was this the decision brief setup. Basically, like Obama was a night owl, and but he optimized the information flow of like all of the bureaucracy of the White House to like be designed in a way that was actionable and sort of like essentially maximize the return on attention of him, right? And I don't think this was even invented by him. I think it was something that like this practice existed at the White House. So the decision memo is one page, and there is a decision at the end of it, and it's got all the context, that his team thinks he needs for that one page. And at the end, it says yes, no, let's discuss. And he turns a like nuanced, complicated problem that like all the framing of the decision, all the nebulous work of problem solving is actually being outsourced to his team, because he has to, run the whole country and also like
there's a lot going on.
And by the time a decision gets to Obama's desk, it's because nobody else wanted to make it, right? Like,
right.
Often that is the case when you're leading an organization. Is there are going to be places where you're making trade-offs between your values, like we are choosing between a rock and a hard place, and we just have to pick one, and someone is going to be, holding the buck. So, but yeah, so the optimization of information flow for the leader or the decision maker, like that matters. I was thinking about one of the things that I love about Amazon is the idea that in order to hold a meeting, you have to have written in, not as a presentation or like a PowerPoint, but a paper of like, this is why we are having the meeting. This is what the expected outcomes are. Like, this is the decision to be made, or what, I don't know. I actually remember all the details of the structure of those documents, but like that, I think is one of those, they say like, the right mental model is worth like 1,000 IQ points. And I think that's one of the things that, when you've got the team itself has mental models, right? The team itself has systems and procedures. And if they're really good ones, that's very different from really bad ones. And that's how you can, All right. Last thing I want to say though is like, it matters that they work for you too, right? Because I tried to follow all of Amazon's processes when I first read them, and like a number of them I couldn't do myself. It didn't make sense to try to force that into an organization if I'm not going to be able to do it too, right? So in terms of building your company, you have to find, Bridgewater is one of my favorite examples of a company because they have a 70% attrition rate in the first 3 months, right? Like only about 1 out of 3 people, which is funny because we have about a 70% attrition rate in terms of people who are either fired or, like leave, like, which is actually good if you're learning how to make, a thing. So anyways, you got to run.
I got to jump.
Awesome. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah,
Peace.
We'll chat later.